Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Andrew Wolk, and I have Brad Calvert from the city here, who will introduce himself in a moment. Thanks for those who have joined. Yeah, we are recording this to post on our website, but we're here at least at the latest until 6 o'clock. And we're going to share some slides with you with two opportunities for question and answer. And with the few number of people, I think as Julia said, we're opening up to just be able to have a dialogue around that. For those who have not met Julia who are in town, she is the communication coordinator for what I'm going to share with you is Steamboat for All. I did want to set some context for today's presentation and apologize if I have a coughing attack. I have allergies going on. Um, but today is just a very basic introduction to what the city and Steamboat for All are calling the Affordable Housing Dashboard. We'll share a little bit more about what that is and how we're sharing it later on. But before I do that, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, what is Steamboat for All? Steamboat for All is a very new initiative that was born out of the Community Foundation, where a bunch of donors got together to talk about the challenges Steamboat faces to preserve the economic diversity and sustain a thriving workforce. Um, the very fabric of our local workers that make this community vibrant, teachers, healthcare workers, first responders, and more. We're particularly concerned about supporting those individuals in that 25 to 44-year-old range who work or aspire to work in Steamboat and want to build a future here. Um, those concerned residents, as we talked about how to approach this work, have decided that we're interested in devoting our time, our expertise, and equally as much our treasure with money to help support that work, that mission I just described, and are doing that in three interrelated strategies that we identified. One is about how we can do things to reduce the cost of living. The second is to try to help advance affordable housing policies. And the third is to strengthen communication and accountability around the issues that faced our community overall. We work in two specific domains, and we'll share a little bit about both of those pieces of work. Um, The first is we are seeking to educate the public. So this is actually the second webinar we've run. The first one also with Brad, and that was sharing what are the current affordable housing policies that are priorities at the city. And Brad presented to us the five main policies at that time that they were working on, shared those and took questions. And that webinar is up on our website and anyone can listen to it. This is the second of what we hope to be a series. The next one that we're hoping to do is around childcare and first impressions at the county, and Megan, who is hopefully going to have a pretty interesting report to come out about the childcare crisis and the cost of it and what might be able to be done. But we'll be hoping to host these types of webinars every month or two and then immediately post them on our website for anyone to look at them. Um, the other part of the way that we're working is in the donate area. And what we are trying to do is to find leverage ways for money to advance important things that we think could happen, not in the millions of dollars range, but more in the tens of thousands of dollars of range. Um, and a really good example of that is this affordable housing dashboard. It was already in the city plan, and Brad will talk more about that in a moment. Um, we just came to the city and said, well, how do we make that a reality? Well, we don't have the money for it. And we said, well, let us find the money for it, but we'd like to partner to see how that can look together. So since we've contracted an outside firm, Brad and I have been working with them very closely to move that dashboard along. And that's what today's session is about. We have other examples of donate, and you can see those on our website, steamboatforall.org. So I'm going to pass it over to Brad, and Brad is going to introduce yourself, of course, and then can get us started on the topic for today.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Someone give me a thumbs up. You can hear me and everything. All right, Julia. Thank you.
I can hear you. I can hear
I
you.
figured good to see some familiar names and faces in the audience today. As Andrew mentioned, I'm Brad Calvert. I'm a planner with the city of Steamboat Springs. The story I always tell is that I was hired in February of 2022 to build out the long-range planning function of the planning department. What that really meant is on day one, I started working on housing policy and strategy work because it was just the pressing issue at the time, and obviously remains the pressing issue in this community today. Nothing's changed in those 3 years, unfortunately. Um, but as Andrew mentioned, the dashboard project that we're sort of introducing today is something that was included in the city's housing strategy and action plan that was adopted by council back in August 2024. We really kind of view this strategy as sort of a framework for coordinated action. The city has a role in housing policy and planning. The housing authority obviously has a role in housing production and running programs, as do many other stakeholders and partners in the community. We very much sort of positioned that strategy to be sort of a long-term roadmap, but specifically it commits the city and our community partners to have continuous and ongoing dialogue focused on understanding whether our actions and investments are effective. It's really kind of let's continuously evaluate how we're doing. Let's monitor our progress. Let's be data driven. Let's capture information to help drive decisions as to whether we stay the course, keep doing what we are doing, change course, amplify what we're doing, those sorts of things. And as Andrew mentioned, that strategy very specifically committed the city to building out essentially a public transparency and education tool via a dashboard like the one we're going to be kind of introducing today. There are a couple of reasons why we felt it was important to do this. Really to sort of build transparency and trust, and the city sort of stepping in, maybe more so than we have in the past decade or so, into the space of housing, but also importantly to sort of communicate risk and risk management strategies to make sure, in particular, city investments are having the types of outcomes that people want us to see. Um, and we really think that the dashboard is an important sort of impact reporting tool. What recent achievements have happened? What are the current housing challenges that we continue to face? And as Andrew was sort of pointing to, what priorities are on the books and are being pursued by the city and our partners, so that people understand how the response is continuing to grow. This sort of describes one of the things that the strategy commits us to is annual updates at minimum via something like a dashboard, achievements, challenges, upcoming priorities, that sort of thing. We've actually been doing this with city council really more like twice a year. But the dashboard would be a good way to just sort of memorialize those updates so that anyone who wants to follow along and understand how the city and our partners are responding to our housing challenges, they can hopefully pretty quickly get up to speed. You can go to the next slide, Andrew. As I sort of described all of that sort of maybe verbally, but this kind of lays this out a little bit in terms of like the key components of the dashboard. We really think it's important to have some North Stars, some very important things that we want to measure and message around. And Andrew really sort of talked about that. We view a vibrant and healthy Steamboat Springs means having residents of all incomes and ages. I will bore you by reading how the housing strategy talks about this, but I just think it's an important goal that was established as the city adopted this. We want the city of Steamboat Springs to be a place where families can stay and grow, workers of all income levels can afford to live near their jobs, and everyone can find housing that meets their needs, including seniors who want to age in place, people with disabilities, large families, and others. So this needs to be a place that works for as many people as possible. And we really think it's important to sort of also track sort of how we're doing on key metrics, particularly affordability metrics. So that's the type of information that would be presented in the dashboard. Think of that as share of households that are either cost burdened, meaning paying more than 30% of their income towards housing costs, or severely cost burdened, more than 50% of their income is going to housing each and every month. Those are key indicators as to essentially the stability of the workforce, because when you're paying more than those amounts, it is destabilizing the household. Can they afford childcare? Can they afford healthcare costs. I mean, there's any number of things that are challenging once you sort of reach those housing cost burden ratios. And then other metrics, one that sort of was discovered through updating or creating the housing strategy is in some ways how far behind we are of our from our peer communities, particularly as it relates to housing units that are occupied by full-time residents that have some sort of income or residency restriction on those units. They're not free market units. So, for instance, Aspen, 70% of their full-time occupied units actually have some type of income or workforce location restriction on that. Vail's 45%. Telluride is 40%, and even that is in some ways not a full picture because Mountain Village, which is connected to Telluride, is 70% of their full-time occupied units have a restriction on it. By comparison, Steamboat Springs is 8%. So we really have not created as a community the portfolio that allows the maximum number of people to access affordable housing. So these are the types of things that we think are important sort of things to document and measure over time to track our progress. And then the other sort of two pieces of the dashboard are kind of two things that I think of both as pipeline measures. One is very sort of numeric in the sense of like, what is the pipeline of housing units that are in some process of development to meet the demand that's documented, and what are the sort of the overall profiles of those developments in terms of how many units, restricted at what level, affordable to whom. So we actually understand how the production side of a response is functioning. Are we actually bringing enough units online to meet our demand, both current and in the future? And then the other thing is really what I think of as more of like a policy pipeline. Andrew sort of talked about a previous conversation that we had a few months back, just letting folks know and understand where we are in terms of pursuit of housing action and policies. So, for instance, we are working on a policy right now related to what gets called inclusionary zoning and linkage fee that will, in some ways, attempt to harness the market in such a way that this all development in Steamboat Springs is contributing to the development of affordable housing. And so just making sure people understand that we are continuously working on new policies and programs and evaluating the impact of those programs after launch to understand if they're having the impact that was intended, and to essentially stage more policies and programs for future action as well. So just so that people understand there's both a production side of the pipeline as well as policies that enable more production going forward. And it's important to document both of those.
I think the other thing, Brad, I would add, well, two things. One, I think we're attempting in the way this is laid out in front of you as sort of a story, right? And the story can actually be left to right, which is the way the arrows are, or right to left. But and that story is that there are some key outcomes that are showing how our city or community, I should say, is changing, and areas that we'd like to see that at least it stabilize and not move in the wrong direction. And in addition to those are affordability measures that also are as we know from the Yampa Valley Housing Report, right, are pretty alarming. And so that's sort of like where we are, and we hope those will change, right? So that's like the story. And then, okay, well, what are we doing about that? Well, for this dashboard, we're only dealing with the housing part is, well, here's how we're trying to get more housing of some sort. And we're going to look at that and try to look at that on a consistent basis. And that's only going to be done by a set of policies in the story that are supposed to produce X numbers to meet those demands, that hopefully those demands then change those affordability numbers and come back and then hopefully make our community sort of North Star indicators better. So that's how this is trying to be put together as a story. The second thing I wanted to mention is we're now, so where we are in the process is we have completed the first two areas. And we're not going to share with you the dashboard itself because there are quite a bit of measures, not nearly the amount that are in the YVHA report, but a series of both North Star outcomes and affordability ones that we think we arrived at that feel pretty solid as to tell the stories that I just described. So instead, we're going to show you some snapshots of ones in the dashboard themselves, of which there aren't that many more than we're going to share with you. We will share those few, and then we will pause to take questions. And those questions can be specifically about the North Star and affordability. If it moves in a different direction, I'm happy to play an audible. But then we will go back and we're just beginning to do the other two sections. And we want to have an open dialogue of what do you hope you see in those? And what feedback would you have? Because we're just beginning that. But if you can bear with us before we open it up to any Q&A or clarifying questions, which I'm more than happy to have, I'm going to pass to Brad, who's going to do the first, I think it's one or two slides, and I'm going to take the third one.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So as Andrew mentioned, we have by and large built out or developed for the web the first two modules or stories that Andrew was talking about. This is kind of an attempt to kind of give you a glimpse of what that looks like. Some of these are likely going to feel familiar to you if you have been looking at some of the housing demand and need work that's been happening over the last few years in our community. One thing that I'll just sort of note from a dashboard development perspective, to oversimplify, there are two types of dashboards that I have found myself working on over the years. One is where a user engages directly with the data, and there's maybe not that much interpretation that's happening and presented to the user. And then there's a version like this one where there is a bit of curation as to how and in what way the stories are best told, and helping a user sort of run the story sort of left to right, as Andrew mentioned, and really trying to help them understand what the issue is and what the response is. So we are really sort of leaning into interpretation and trying to tell the story. As Andrew mentioned, it's a data-driven story, but it is still very much a story. So these are just sort of two examples. I'll maybe spend more time on the one on the left, which is like just a classic sort of challenge of data visualization. This is really trying to compare or show the gap between what it takes to afford the median priced home in Steamboat Springs compared to sort of typical types of workers, sort of based on the sectors that you see on the slide, education services, all the way to healthcare and social assistance, and really even sort of assuming two earners per household that both work in the same sector. You may be even missing it if you're looking at the screen. What is needed to afford the median priced home is well over $300,000, and we don't have any of these earners who, even with two income earners in the household, earn more than $150,000. So they are well short of the ability to purchase a home. And if you obviously go to the left-hand side in the educational services, it's even a much smaller gap. The slide on the right sort of tells a relatively similar story in terms of who and what the market is serving in terms of income levels for people that are looking to own and buy homes in our community. That much of the market is tilted towards those households that earn more than 200% of area median income. So vast majority of sales are oriented towards those types of individuals, and very few sales at even the 180% AMI and below. You can go to the next slide. And this is we're really trying to sort of present both owner stories as well as renter stories, because they're both really important to understanding the picture. So we really sort of picked one owner story in the previous slide and some rental stories on this side as well. And we really do want to sort of track over time on a few key indicators. So what you're seeing on the slide, the graphic on the left, are really sort of the actual cost of rent that renters absorb in our community, and just over time, the 2006 timeframe through 2020, you can see a relatively large share of renters were paying less than $1,500 a month in rent, and a dramatic shift in 2019, 2020 up into 2023, where there is a very large segment of the renter population that is paying more than $3,000 a month in rent, and a dramatically shrinking share that are paying that under $1,500. And then on the right, you're really looking at kind of how rental units how the dynamics shift when you think of market rate versus affordable units who have income restrictions on them. Really, at the one bedroom rate, market rate rent and maximum rent that can be charged for affordable units are generally they're pretty similar. They're not the same, but they're similar. But as you shift into the three-bedroom units, this idea of having opportunities for people to grow their families and therefore need larger units, you really run into a very large gap between what the market can command in terms of rental rates and what an affordable unit would rent for. So clearly there's work to be done to make sure we have larger units that are affordable so that families can grow into those units. And next slide, I think, is for Andrew.
And I think that sort of, gets to the focus of Steamboat for All. While we are interested in all of the various local workers and their families and how they can afford to live here, we are particularly concerned about that 25 to 44-year-old who particularly would love to have, they've made their way through Steamboat, but they no longer, when they meet someone, can feel like they can continue to stay here, let alone raise a family. And that can just have drastic conclusion implications for our community. And that's where age in this deeper dive on the dashboard is so critical. So you can see these two different hockey sticks here that have happened over time. And the statement, Steamboat Springs is growing modestly in headcount, but aging at a breakneck speed. Since 2006 through 2010, the city's median age climbed more than 7 years to roughly 43, and the share of residents 65 and older is more than doubled. So that middle group, that is a really strong foundation of our community, is leaving very, very quickly. And so this, as well as the other data that Brad shared, are things that we will, at the very least, have access to public data to be able to report on a yearly basis, and whether we can reverse these trends. So I'm going to pause there and like to try to keep it to the general framework, or the North Stars and affordability. We will go into a feedback session about the two other areas around pipeline specifically, but I'm happy to open up. And maybe, since I can't see you, I think Brad and Julia can see you now that we're talking. Maybe just jump in and tell us who you are and state your question or your comment. And I guess you could put it in the Q&A and Julia can say that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if there isn't either, then we'll just continue to move on, but I'll certainly pause for a moment and let that opportunity happen.
Hey, Andrew, can you hear me?
Yes, is that you, Catherine?
Hey, Andrew, thanks for doing this. This is awesome. Really appreciate it. I want to thank Brad too. We're very lucky as a community to have Brad working on housing. One question, one comment I just wanted to make, and I really appreciate Steamboat for All focusing on the workforce we have. I think one differentiation, Brad, and I mentioned this to the team of the Housing Authority also with the EPS study, is with the growth of over 65 demographics that we're seeing. One differentiation we don't have right now is how much of that growth is wealthy over 65 moving to town, and how much of that growth is our workforce aging over 65. Because we do have, valued workforce that have put in decades of work at, resort wages or human service wages over the decades that are now aging into retirement, that probably have, limited income. So I think that differentiation is important, just as Colorado and Route County and Steamboat hopefully start being a little more intentional about our vulnerable aging population. So I just wanted to toss that piece of data point that I think we need to have, both for perhaps this dashboard and the demand study the Housing Authority did.
Yeah, let me jump in then, Brad, and you should discuss. I think it's an excellent point, if I can repeat it back, which is that as the workforce ages, they are going to, particularly losing their salary and who knows what their benefits were, have a significant affordability issue to stay here, and they're equally important. And I would say for us, we're probably not focused there, but I would say for this dashboard, but I want to turn now to Brad, that I think it's an excellent thing that we should be including, for sure. But Brad, you should jump in.
I'll add a couple things, and I always appreciate Catherine because she oftentimes asks questions about things that are really important to me. So this has actually been an issue I've focused on for a long time, particularly understanding the needs of older adults and their basically their community needs, not just their housing needs. And in most cases, Catherine, when I was working in the Front Range, I tended to have to communicate to folks. This was this when you were seeing when a community was seeing a growth in the older adult population, it was not the result of in-migration. It was not retirees moving to a new location. It was just the natural aging process and people aging into the over 65 cohort. It's a little bit different here. We do see a fair amount of in-migration of folks that are 65 and older who, to your point, may very well be high wealth individuals. The thing that maybe sometimes gets lost there is those folks also generate jobs. There's a very real retiree factor in terms of the actual services that they need. And I'm not just talking like skilled nursing, healthcare type things. I mean, that is part of it. But there's more professional services. There's any number of services that are needed to support those individuals, and those folks obviously are probably sitting somewhere in that 25 to 44-year-old demographic that Andrew has mentioned, and do need housing to be able to provide services to older adults, either be those need-based services or professional services and those types of things. So there is very much a link between not only growth in the older adult population, but also demand for housing across the income spectrums and age spectrums.
Let's unless Catherine, you have a follow-up. Are there other questions you or other people? I can't see, by the way, anything because I'm running the slides, but other questions that people have about the overall framework or particularly the sections around North Stars and affordability? Okay. Um, so this is where we're actually looking for some feedback. So hopefully people will not be shy. Um, but we're at the early stages of doing this part of the work. It hasn't been that challenging to come up with a limited number of measures. I mean, they've been reported on many times, including the recent report. We just had to narrow them down, which to one's thoughts were most important, things like age and cost burden households. But how we put together what the actual development pipeline looks like and how we think about sharing what the policies are that are being acted on and report on them. That's where the real action is, right? Because that's the work that's going to get done to see whether or not we're affecting the things we're just started to share with you. So we'd love to hear from you on any feedback you have, questions you have, ideas you have. So I'm gonna again open it up and see if people have any questions or comments or ideas. All of them are welcome.
So this is Larry, and I've been part of this group since the beginning. I just get so overwhelmed in just thinking about where we need to be that it just sort of boggles my mind. I think, this long range planning is absolutely necessary. And, we're trying to develop these units and all this. It takes so much time and the need is so now. And I don't know what temporary things. I know that, the city is looking at potentially subsidizing long-term rentals versus short-term rentals and, trying to open up that market. I'm just afraid that we're going to be losing so many people on the very necessary workforce jobs that every community requires, that we may eventually get there, but we're not going to have anybody to serve because they're already gone. And, the long terms are great, but I would like to see more focus on what short term we do, because once they're gone, they're gone.
Well, let me give a shout out, Brad, for you, and then you can take that. And because we certainly can on this webinar, even though it's a shift in a question, this dashboard, which we believe in and why we funded it, which I don't know that I would call long-term. I mean, I think we hope this is up and running by Q4, right? And so this is going to create that feedback loop of accountability because many of those short-term things you're talking about, they'll be in that right-hand column, and you'll be able to see whether they're going to affect that development pipeline column, right? So it's not as far off as you think. But you're right, because there's a doom and gloom. Um, I can say in working with Brad and talking to the city, I think that they are trying to understand and move as quick as they can, considering they have, all this STR money. Whether they can move fast enough, I think is a really great question, Larry. But if you want to, Brad, take a moment to talk about anything beyond what was in the affordable housing policy webinar we did that's in addition to that you guys been talking about, that's completely fine. But do know that this is not far off from launching, right? And and hopefully some of those short-term things are going to be listed in that right-hand column, right? That are going to feed into that development pipeline.
And Larry, I mean, I feel you. I probably introduced sort of the notion of long range because I mean, my job is sort of long range planner. So I'm always thinking, sort of out into the future, but I would describe, the conversation that has been very oriented towards, and particularly on the STR side, how can we deploy the funds to have the impact on the soonest possible schedule? So for instance, when council instructed, me to put out a request for proposals to try to be that very first tranche of spending through a strategic, approach to gather interest from the development community, it was very clear we wanted to invest in the units that could come online the fastest. And so that's been very much a focus. And you mentioned, the direction that we heard, from council, last week, which is to like really think about how and in what way we can reposition, the existing stock of rental units, such that they are more affordable to more people. And because we are fortunate to have, the STR tax fund that Andrew mentioned, we can bring operating subsidy to the table such that a market rate unit can be converted to an affordable unit, in relatively short order. So we are looking both at the long term, but also trying to figure out how we can make impact, as soon as possible.
And maybe Larry or everyone else in the crowd, I'll then put the question back to you. Knowing that maybe Brad misrepresented those terminology, just imagine for a moment, just to try to bring this to life, that whether it's things like some version of Brown Ranch, if that got to a certain point, or linkage fees, or short-term rental subsidization, or subsidization of current long-term rentals, were listed in that right-hand column, right? So and had some connection to both what were the policies and the hopeful expectations of how many sort of units it created, right? And then following in that development pipeline, you would see those as the policies and where they are right now and what's happening and are they actually turning into real solid places that people that we're trying to serve are getting filled in some way. Does that logic in the way we're describing it, that if that's happening in real time, sometime by Q4, feel like Larry, it's at least giving you information of action. By no means may it be even close to filling the kind of action we need. I think that's the challenge of this very large problem. But I'd love to hear from you or other people based on your comment. Does that start to get to some level of communication of action for urgency?
Well, and this is Larry again. The answer is yes. And I'd love to see the planning. And there's many variables here, including potential Brown Ranch. And my discouragement becomes when we're having to build units, that just takes time.
Yeah.
So finding the alternative in a short-term space to try to keep people here until we have units available, to me, that's just a key, because when they're gone, they're kind of gone, and it's hard to recruit people in. I'm on the board of a major healthcare organization here. We struggle with staffing, and it like everyone else does, because they can find a nice job here, but they can't live here. Catherine and I discussed the senior living progression of seniors aging in this population in a different meeting earlier today on a different topic, because it's all part of providing for especially an aging population that may not have the financial resources to stay here once they stop working. So the answer to your question is yes.
But I think interesting
we
about
just can't develop it fast enough.
right. I think the interesting thing, Brad, and tell me if I'm right, is there is a framing here around shovels in the ground versus converting existing, got a short-term versus long-term meeting the need, that this could be divided by, that the public can see and weigh in on. Look, you are not nearly, city, addressing the current outflow that's happening in those hockey sticks of those ages, right? Because everything is sort of in this, we gotta find space and build on it. And I think that's an interesting way to sort of frame the next phase of this, right? What's short term that can happen now in that action policy versus long term that's going to take longer? I think would be a very valuable additional framing of this.
I mean,
You know, and Andrew,
go
I'm
ahead,
sorry,
Catherine.
Brad.
No, you go,
Oh,
Catherine.
yeah. I was going to say, first, thanks, Larry. I mean, Larry does such an exceptional job with Northwest Colorado Health, so we're lucky to have you in our community. One thing I wanted to add on to this is that I do think, Andrew, while looking at this dashboard, I think if it's possible, it might be a good data point to separate out the short term. If the city council moves forward with that, like that short term to long term, or long term, long term to long term, on the dashboard to say which are temporary new affordable housing,
Mm.
because building something in that's going to be affordable in perpetuity is very important just for our community investment. And so people, it's not just for the first person who wins the lottery, it's for our community. And that is something with that, short term to long term, or long term to, just subsidizing the rent for a certain time period, it's not sustainable. It will go away. And I think we have to recognize the cost of moving, and also just the security people. The current housing insecurity causes a lot of hardship, whether it's both financial or mental. I mean, it's the fact that you could lose your housing in a day or a month or a year. So if you do those short-term ones, I think separating it out is important. But also for everyone on this, on the, who's on, I can't tell who's on the webinar, but Larry, push city council, push housing authority, to be intentional about getting things built sooner. I mean, it takes longer. It takes longer to build items, but the sooner you start it, the sooner it's done. I mean, the housing authority in the city are working on Cottonwoods over by the urgent care center on the first phase. Push them to move faster on the second. I mean, we've got an urgent need. So I think pushing our community leaders to be intentional and get things moving in that pipeline, so we have an annual basis of new things coming online that are affordable in perpetuity, is important. But Andrew, if the dashboard could separate out what's
Yeah.
temporary affordable one versus what's long term, I think that would be meaningful.
Brad, correct me if I'm
Brad,
wrong.
what do you think?
Yeah, let me
Yeah.
just sort of state it back, and then Brad should comment about this term temporary. I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, Brad, I think the question is going to be whether the subsidies that are being considered would become ongoing subsidies as part of SDR tax, right? So it's not necessarily the money gets pulled away, but these are tests that could be very valuable, right? If it makes sense to subsidize rent for a certain number of people on a continuous basis, and the argument is made that that could be a positive thing, it could become permanent. Am I right? Or because I think Catherine has a good point that you don't want to mislead people of temporary versus perpetuity, but I think these are tests to see whether or not maybe a portion of STR cast should be used in this way.
Well, and I mean, I would describe it more as like trying to hit Larry's point, that waiting for a traditional production strategy that is going from the concept of a project on a site all the way through lease up of a unit that is affordable. I mean, you're looking at 3.5, 4 years minimum, right? So can we actually unlock some inventory sooner than that, such that the pipeline that is the more traditional production pipeline has there's a little bit more runway for it to take the time that it needs.
But I
To Catherine's point, yes, I would separate those two because I think of that development pipeline as the traditional way that one would think of housing as a durable good that is affordable for 20, 30, 40 years. It is very much sort of community oriented in terms of it being affordable for a longer duration of time versus something like a relatively short term duration pilot project, test project that's providing operating subsidy such that affordable units can be provided and market rate developments. To Andrew's point, that may be so overwhelmingly successful that it's something we figure out how to do long term. But I mean, we're very much in the sort of pilot and test and evaluate phase on something like that.
And to Catherine's point, I do think we should make sure it's very clear, though, that this is a
Yep.
test and it could go away versus a brick and mortar that's not going away. And I think it's an excellent point. Let me ask you another question, Brad, to Larry's point. Unfortunately, though, the only way you can only do this on the rental side, right? Are there any things being considered on the permanent housing side versus the rental side?
On the ownership side,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
the primary one that's sort of new that actually I got council direction on this last week is how and in what way we as the city using STR tax funds could purchase deed restrictions. So you have a market rate home and you are compensated to actually place a deed restriction on your home. That could just be because it's something that you want to do. That could be through the sort of purchase process where new home buyer does not qualify, cannot afford a market rate unit, but wants to remain in this community. And so through that process, we bring city money to the table in exchange for, at the time of that transaction, a deed restriction to keep that unit affordable in perpetuity is brought into the mix. There are model programs, particularly in Summit County and Vale and Breckenridge for sure on those types of programs. So we'd be modeling it after those.
I mean, I really
And
like.
then,
Yeah, go ahead, Catherine. Go ahead,
oh,
please.
I was going to say, yeah. No, I think what Brad's talking about, I mean, there particularly the housing for sale market is softening. So if there's a, $600,000 small condo for sale that the city could invest X number of in 100,000, 200,000, put a deed restriction and allow someone to buy it, it makes a difference.
Yep.
I do think as a community, need to be thoughtful on the rent subsidies, which is in effect what the, short-term to long-term or long-term to long-term is. We do not have a true supply demand economy in our housing market in Steamboat because of the second homeowners and and vacation people who we want to invest or rent our units. But we also, if we're going to have new free market units being built, we also don't want to just artificially keep that price high by subsidizing. And I think it's a discussion if we're going to be subsidizing rent, do we want to subsidize the landlords or have a subsidy for actual our workforce or our residents to apply for this lottery or whatever and use the housing they choose best. So I think it needs to be a thoughtful discussion because this is in effect just doing a subsidy for someone's rent, and that we need to make sure we're benefiting the residents and not just the landlords.
Well,
And
to that point, no, I heard a new voice. Please go ahead.
it's Julia. It looks like someone has their hand up, so please go ahead.
Yeah, just jump right in. That's great.
Hello, everyone. My name's Michael Lamott. I know Catherine and Brad well, and I guess I haven't quite formulated how my feedback might be used to be implemented into this dashboard, but maybe just by sharing the things that are coming up for me, so you guys can think about if they're applicable or not. But I think some of the points that Catherine's making, specifically around needing to consider the housing needs of the 65 plus demographic, it's really linked to building the right type of housing. So I'm really glad to hear that as it relates to creating a sort of supply and demand dynamic that does not currently exist today. So I myself am in that. I'm 33 years old and I have my first child, so I'm in that demographic that you all are focusing on. So thank you for doing so. But uh, something that struck me in the housing needs report recently put out by the Housing Authority is that there's a difference between demand and inventory. And so specifically around the catch up demand that's in that report, it's really talking about the what would need to be done to uncost burden the number of the demand that's represented in that number in that section of the report. But that doesn't necessarily translate to the type of unit that needs to be built in order to serve someone who maybe isn't cost burdened. But to your point at the beginning, Andrew, that maybe just the inventory that serves their phase of life just strictly doesn't exist. And so I do think there's a strategy where building the right type of housing for our aging population can also serve or create liquidity in the market if they're in a home that's too big for their needs. It can help, if there's the right policy pieces in place, like deed restriction, like being able to purchase the deed restriction on a market rate home, that could then create some of that liquidity for the size of home someone such as myself might need as I'm trying to grow my family. And so I don't know the answer yet as to how we put that into play. I'm on the Housing Authority Board with Catherine, and so that's something that I've shared with the teams that I serve on the board. Is that I think that's really where the work that we need to do is in collaboration with everyone that's passionate about this endeavor. But how do we marry the demand versus the inventory so that we're building the right thing so that the numbers in this dashboard do move? Not only on affordability, but longevity in the community, because you've got a way to climb that ladder.
First of all, Brad and I think I can speak, but we couldn't agree with you more. And in that, that pipeline thing, while it won't be perfect, we need to apply inventory to different types of housing at stage of life and we'll do our best. You can make some level of assumption, but it's absolutely right that the people that are in the early stage of their life need a different type of housing than the people at your stage in life versus the people that are aging out, and make some at least attempt to frame the way we're going to do these in some way. And so that is already the very much an intention to break it out that way. And also, and I know Brad already is talking to people at the Housing Authority. I mean, we're going to be trying to work very closely with the Housing Authority to develop these two sections. So it's not going to happen in a vacuum. I did want to mention to ask you, Brad, whether you would put it in this category of short term. I know we've talked about down payment assistance, which could get to the ownership issue as well. There's both expanding out what the Housing Authority already has as a program, which are smaller amounts of money, but there also is trying to, work possibly with the banks about significantly expanding the amount that someone might be able to be supported on down payment assistance. Brad, would that be considered a short-term thing if we could get that moving quickly?
Short term in terms of being able to deliver it quickly?
Yeah.
I think so. In part, I sort of mentioned this to council in describing that there have been some opportunities that have sort of naturally been coming our way to sort of begin to implement that program like that, where again you're really as the city paying the value of that deed restriction to either a current owner or someone who is in the process of purchasing a unit. So that is something that I have talked with council and they're supportive of, and we'll look to move as quickly as possible as we can on it.
I mean, as you said to me, I think earlier today, I mean, the gap is the financial institution, right, to help with something like that.
Yep.
I did want to mention it because it is another tool possibly in the short-term category Larry's talking about.
And I'll just quickly, Michael did, of course, articulated the issue perfectly. The thing that I just want to maybe underscore is particularly sort of this notion of creating housing that works for people as their economic and life circumstances change, which I think is something that we should all be endeavoring to do. gets extra complicated in a relatively small place in rural Northwest Colorado. When I was working in the Front Range, like you didn't necessarily, as a community of 13,000, have to 13,000 people have to do that. Your neighboring jurisdiction can do that. We have limited ability to do that. But I know, working with several communities in Jefferson County in particular, they saw real positive impacts in their housing markets and systems when they built age restricted and age targeted housing. And really what happened is those units got filled by people who were 65 and older, who simply were in a housing situation that didn't work for them anymore, and it freed up that stock for the growing families. It created the actual outlet that people needed to be able to access housing that worked better for them. And it essentially had twice the impact, because it availed housing for two types of folks who were looking for housing that better met their needs.
I think we have time if there's one more comment or question that might would love to hear it. Maybe we have two, but anyone want to follow up with what we said or bring up an entire new topic or question or feedback about this? I just love dividing this up between short term and long term. I think that's a really excellent structural recommendation.
Andrew, I'll just mention one sort of data thing that was not in the slides that we presented. But one thing that we discovered is the cost of a household in this community the second they add a child. Like, it is dramatic in terms of like the reality of what the expenses are that they need to cover when you go from a 2-person household, 2 earners with no child, to a 2-person household with a child. I mean, so a place that already had an affordability gap just on the housing side becomes even further out of reach when you add that additional important part of your family. And so that was really instructive to really sort of underscore both the housing side and just more the affordable living side of things that Andrew mentioned, and kind of the broader scope of this effort. Again, not news for anybody, but like when you actually see it in the data, like it's particularly instructive.
Yeah. I'm thinking to myself that maybe we gave Brad the last word, to tell you the truth, because I think it was a good one. Unfortunately, it's in that North Star affordability, and the next phase of this, as we said, is to work really hard to organize those 2 other columns, which will give a much more transparent and ability to see how well we can sort of address this. We will certainly have the opportunity to get feedback on that in various different ways, probably not in this setting. So I just want to thank you for those who did attend. One of the biggest reasons that we did this was, even though it's busy in summer, we're more interested in getting information out than how many people may attend. So we will take this one or the one tomorrow. We'll decide which one we think was better. So if yours doesn't make it, don't get offended by that. But then it'll be posted on steamboatforall.org. Already we've had quite a large number for us just being around a short amount of time on the affordable housing policy priority webinar. And if you haven't seen that, go to the website and you'll be able to watch that and hear a lot more from Brad, because that was a Brad show for sure. So thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciate it. And look for more from us in the future, as we hope to work with the city and others to attack these really challenging issues. And so appreciate greatly your attendance. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Appreciate the hard work.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Larry and Brad and Julie.
Thank you all.
All right. People are dropping off slowly. Got Lulu still here. Thank you, guys. I thought that went great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think what we'll do, though, is let's see how the next one goes. If there's not a strong opinion, but certainly no need to edit this one yet, Julia.
Yeah, of course. I'll wait.
And I think you're not going to be on the next one, right? It'll be Jennifer. So
Correct.
I think me and Brad will sort of say, that one was a little better than this one. I thought those were some good engaged conversations. Brad, we'll follow up. Obviously, we said Monday will be our debrief. So
Okay.
Let's everyone go enjoy their Wednesday and have a good night.
Yep,
Thank
see y'all.
you.
Thanks.
Right. Bye.
Later. Bye.